Hey everybody, welcome to Modscast. Little irritated today by an article I want to talk about, which has been going up on, saw people posted on social media. It's from Huffington Post. Some people I know and respect posted it as, hey, this is how I feel, or this is a great expression, and those people I hope know I respect them, and we can have a nuanced discussion about it at some time if you want. As a teacher of writing and language, and as somebody who's been on here talking a bit about my philosophy, my commitment to pursue truth and to reasonable discussion of things, there were just too many glaring errors in it, errors in reasoning. Let me put it, I expect this kind of thing from one of my sophomore students, not from the Huffington Post, or from any journalistic source that claims to be, and it's editorial, it's opinion piece, I get that, but the idea that it gets presented as this great piece is problematic for any number of reasons, which I'll get into. I'll post a link to the article in the description so you can look at it for yourself. The title, I don't know how to explain to you that you should care about other people. Okay, that's what it's called. My first response to that is, yeah, I don't need you to. Who the hell do you think you are that I need you to explain to me that I should care about other people? Because the underlying assumption here is if you don't agree with me about how to do something, it must mean you don't care about people. The obvious juvenile, reductive nature of that, and self-indulgent and self-aggrandizing nature of that, right? That my opinions on how to solve political problems mean that I care about people and you don't. All right. The author, I guess Kayla Chadwick, is a contributor video editor. She says she doesn't have children, but she wants to support education. Okay. But the key thing about not having children is, as any parent knows, when you figure out how to help your child, you have to weigh, you care about your child more than anything in the world, but that means you have to be really, really careful and intentional and really think hard about how you handle each situation. How generous are you with stuff? Because you don't want to overindulge the child, right? You have to balance that stuff, right? And weigh what are the long-term implications of a choice when it's whether it's a question of discipline or nourishment or any of those things, right? And again, in a situation where you're, as I've said in another video, parents' job is to make themselves unnecessary, ultimately, right? So she essentially says she's having what she calls fatigue with political discourse. She says, there's a stumbling block I keep running into when trying to reach across the proverbial aisle and have those difficult conversations so smugly suggested by think piece after think piece. That's how she prefaces it, and that's when she says what her title is, right? I don't know how to explain to someone why they should care about other people. Okay. And the first instance she brings is the minimum wage, and she posts a link, and an extra 4.3% will pay for it, and she's happy to pay more for her Big Mac in order for somebody to feed their own family. Okay. The radical oversimplification of that, okay, is pretty juvenile. That is, if you don't support the minimum wage, you don't want people to be able to live and support their families. It's ridiculous. Okay, Economics 101 will tell you that it's a basic principle that when you increase the minimum wage, and you're already seeing it, right? What happens is fewer jobs, people will seek to automate more. Why? Not because they're bad people, but because they run a business, okay? And if someone from the outside comes in and tells you how much you need to spend on, think about something. You work out your household budget, how much you can spend on each thing, right? On things that you need. And if someone from outside, without looking at your books, came in and said, well, this is what you can afford to pay, you'd be like, what? How would you know that? You haven't even looked at my numbers. Some blanket idea that this is what everyone can afford to pay. So what's going to happen? So then they're going to have to work with the numbers that you've given. So then you have to work with the numbers that you've given them, and you have to make cuts at other places, right? In order to do that. That's not, you're not a bad person. So suppose you decide I can't have a pet because they've told me this is how much I have to spend on food, or again, necessities, because you need employees. There's no question. Okay. Well, now you have to decide. Okay. Well, then I have to get rid of my pets and turn them out. Right? And I'm not equating pets with people. That's not the point. The point is that you're forced from the outside to prioritize expenditures, not because you're a bad person, but because you've got the math, right? You know what the math is, and someone has introduced an external factor without looking at all of the things that you have to outlay, whatever your particular situation is in your household. All right. It's just problematic. And to suggest that, again, that if you don't agree with a federally stated standard minimum wage, or even government minimum wages in any case, means that you don't care about people. Well, get bent. That's a moral accusation. You're saying, oh, you care about people and I don't. No, I think there might be a better way to do things. And I'm concerned about the drawbacks of doing it this way, long term, right? I'm looking bigger picture. Then she goes on and says, I don't have children, but I'm perfectly content to pay taxes for education. Well, I'm in education. And I'll tell you right now, as far as money goes, is throwing money at every problem the best way to do it? I mean, in other words, if you, when you go to get a new car, upgrade your car, or let's use something necessary, because I agree, education is clearly necessary. So let's say your water coming into your house. Suppose you were getting water and it was, dirty, or you had leaks or something, right? It's inconsistent service, something like that. And you wanted to fix it. Would you just throw more money at it, or would you go, okay, well, how are you going to fix it? What are you going to do to make it better? And how are you going to make it better? Before you threw the money at it? I don't think throwing money at, look, we've thrown a ton of money. Look at stats. We throw a ton of money at public education, and look where we rank worldwide. And she goes on, a quality free education. Quality and free don't often go together necessarily. Free stuff you usually get isn't there. And, well, I can get into that in a minute. Healthcare, again, what is it? Poverty shouldn't be a death sentence in the richest country in the world. If you're okay with thousands of people dying of treatable diseases, just so the wealthiest among us can still hoard more wealth, there's a divide between our worldviews that can never be bridged. What? What are you talking about? I don't want anyone to die of treatable diseases. That's not the question. The question, again, is how? What is the best way to solve it? And the fact that you sit and go, well, it must just be that you don't care about people. You say, I can't have these conversations. Yeah, they are going to be difficult if you're trying to convince people about why they should care with other people, because most of them already do care about other people. The object of the discussion is not, if you're assuming that it's people who care about people and people who don't care about people, okay? That's a binary opposition. Yeah, you're right, we're not going to get anywhere. But the arrogant presumption of that because people differ about means that they're bad people and you're a good person, is ridiculous, is absurd, and quite frankly, it's insulting to those people. Because it's a discussion of means, and people much bigger than I have talked about this, right? This reduction of binary, it caters to emotion, it caters to our own fears. Yeah, it's going to be a difficult conversation. Okay. I don't know how to convince someone how to experience the basic human emotion of empathy. Yep. You know what? That's because they don't need you to. All right. Yeah, there are a couple. People who just don't give a crap. Think about it. How many people are there, do you think, who just don't give a crap about other people? All right. There are some, no question. They're completely selfish. In my opinion, evil, because to me, evil and selfishness, that's it. They're equated. But Sure there are, but they're not the majority, okay? If you look at anything, a car accident, struggles, and people are like, oh, Katrina, the government didn't do anything. People lost their jobs to go down and help people after Hurricane Katrina. Okay, the vast majority of people do care and will help other people, all right? And they are compassionate. The discussion is about means, not about ends, and what the best means to complete it are. And if you think that the best means are just give the state money and have the state give that money to people, all right? Or have the state order people to do things, all right? My answer is this. That's an excuse. Goodness is not in, you don't proxy out doing goodness and helping other people so that you can feel good about yourself. It's the same thing as hashtagging something, right? It enables you to feel good about yourself, but you don't actually have to do anything. The refugee crisis, everyone says, let's take in refugees. Okay, great. How many are you going to take? What? How many are you going to take? That's fine. I'm all for helping people. I agree. But let's not proxy out our goodness, proxy out our virtue, and have the state take care of it. That just makes, so you're not arguing with me to have me go help somebody in my community. If you want to know how you teach people empathy and compassion, is you go do stuff and you take them with you to help people in your community right next to you. You don't try to convince them that they should farm out their goodness to the government. Because that's not morality. That's not goodness. That's deferral. That's substitution. Don't you think we should all empower the government to do good things for us? No, I think we should all do good things ourselves. I mean, this whole notion, I don't know, she goes on, there are all kinds of practical, self-serving reasons to raise minimum wage, fund public schools, right? She says everyone's safer when the general public can read and use critical thinking. Okay, I teach critical thinking. I was taught critical thinking. Do you think that's what they're teaching? Do you think that's what they're teaching? You can throw money at it? How are you going to make sure they're teaching critical thinking? Because teaching one side of, whether it's Zinn's People's History of America or something, teaching one side of a particular argument or debate, that doesn't teach critical thinking. Critical thinking is not one-sided. Okay? It's looking at both sides in all their complexity. Outbreaks of preventable diseases being generally undesirable. I mean, and there's snarky stuff, outbreaks of preventable diseases being generally undesirable. What's that? That's, again, snarky teenage stuff, right? I mean, how do you expect me to take you seriously, right? Because what you're suggesting is, well, I'm so much brighter and smarter, and I mean, it's generally desirable not to have disease. No crap. Nobody wants outbreaks of preventable diseases. That whole assumption that, well, it's generally undesirable. What is that? It's absurd. And again, insulting. If you approach conversations with people, you're not going to teach them anything. Why? Look, I mean, I have the advantage of teaching younger students, sophomores, and I can tell them, look, you don't know anything, but that's not because there's something wrong with you. It's because you haven't been on the planet that long. Okay? So it's normal, right? Sophomore, wise fool, you're stupid. Not because you're a bad person, but because you have to learn things. That's how it works. Okay? Now, I know when I'm talking to adults, you can't do that. You can't come in and be, but even so, actually, I'm not dismissive of them, of their questions, right? Because I understand where they're at, and you try to help them where they're at. Now, that being said, I know the situation in a classroom with my students is different than a situation with other adults. I know that. I know I'm not going to tell them they don't know anything. That's not the point. I'm not going to say, oh, well, I just occupy this high position, or I'm a better human being than you. This is the worst thing. If people are good at speaking or articulate or smart or whatever, it doesn't mean they're a superior human being. It means they have a skill set like anybody else, a basketball player, a golfer, whatever it is, right? And one of the problems I had in higher education was I kept running to people who thought it seemed like they thought they were better human beings, morally superior, because, they'd studied post-structuralism and they understood all the power, mechanisms, and, they were committed to the oppressed. Okay, well, what about when the oppressed changes, when the new people are oppressed, right? I mean, aren't you interested in the more universal dynamic of that? And, it's not humility to say, to climb up on the cross, so to speak, and go, well, I'm no better than anyone else, and so I understand compassion better than you do. Okay, that's self-serving. Um, and then the snark continues, right? The fact that such detached cruelty is so normalized in a certain party's political discourse. Just say the Republicans. That's what you mean. Just say it. Okay? Now, I disagree. It's not normalized. This detached cruelty, uh, it, ridiculous. I started out saying I was mad. I mean, it's absurd. Okay? You've created a caricature. It's a straw man, and you've created it based probably off of internet trolls or whatever. All right. But the idea that if someone disagrees with you, they must be a bad person who doesn't have empathy or sympathy with their fellow human beings, okay, reveals your own short-sightedness and your own unwillingness to investigate other alternative solutions, and your unwillingness to recognize that the issue is a lot more complex, right? And that it may be that long term that these people also care about people. They just think that the means which we should use to help people or help society is different. This article is exactly indicative of the problem that we're having. And I think I'm a free speech guy. Everyone knows that. Okay, so you have to be able to say things and all, but you understand that when you paint your opposition as cruel, uncaring people, right, you're suggesting that they're inhuman. Man's inhumanity to man, right? What do you think extreme people are going to do on the side? Not that it's the fault of the people speaking, mind you. And again, free speech is everything. You have the right to say it. But you also have to understand that if that's the tone we choose in our dialogue with one another, what you're going to get, what you're going to promote, what you're going to make acceptable. If you keep calling the right, uncaring, unsympathetic, and I just don't know how to explain to them. Well, again, as I said at the beginning, that's because they don't need you to explain to them. They're not there to have you explain to them why you should be a good person. My students come into class, they know what they're there to learn, okay? When you have a conversation with somebody, this is the worst kind of virtue signaling. They don't need you to explain to them how to be a good person. God, that is just so annoying. All right? What they want to do is talk about how to solve the problem, what the best way to solve the problem is. And they differ with you about how to do that. And you interpret it as, well, I can't have this conversation because I can't explain to you how to be a good person. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? That's not their problem. The problem is your assumption that because they don't agree with your means, that they want a different end, and that different end is indifferent, that they don't give a crap about people. The arrogance of that, the presumption of that, the snobbery of that is utterly shocking to me. Utterly. I don't know, it shouldn't be shocking, but to have it articulated and published in a major source, it just blows my mind. I don't even know where to begin. But I'll continue. See, I'm not going to say, I don't know how to explain to you that people don't need you to explain to them how to be a good person. I'm not going to say, oh, you're a bad person or you're helpless or hopeless and we can't even have this discussion because you don't understand that people don't need you to explain to them how to be a good person or why it's important to care about other people. Okay? No, I'm going to try and engage in dialogue with you and explain to you. Okay? And you can say, well, I'm being insulting. There's no other way to call this. There just isn't. Okay? And I'm sorry, but that's the reality. It is. I know it's frustrating. These conversations are frustrating. That's part of the deal. It's difficult because they're difficult issues. But if you begin with an a priori assumption that anyone who doesn't agree with you is morally inferior to you, okay, you've already engaged in a kind of elitism. And you've already dehumanized them. And if you've done that, then you're right. Rational discourse isn't possible. But it's not their fault that rational discourse isn't possible. It's because you've dehumanized them and decided that they're not capable of reason. Because of your emotional response, you've decided that they're not capable of reason. You've dehumanized them, and then that's when we can no longer have discourse. So the fact that this article gets posted and held up as this great expression, when it is one of the most pedantic, juvenile pieces I've seen in a major that I can remember seeing in a major publication, is just shocking to me. Because it's a classic instance of somebody who is more interested in being right than doing right. I mean, you say, well, I want to do right by other people. Of course you do, but why don't you start by doing right by the person right across from you? And to do right by the other person across from you is to not go into the conversation obsessed with being right, assuming that you are right, because you've dehumanized them. You're sitting here accusing people of dehumanizing the poor and the people that they don't seem to care about, when really you've dehumanized the person you're having the discussion with, because you've decided that they don't care about other human beings, that they're indifferent, when we all know that our capacity, and you've also decided that you can't have a rational discussion with them because you're not interested in a rational discussion. You're interested in an ethical conversion, which I would argue is unnecessary in most cases. Again, apart from those extreme cases, it's way more important and better to do right than to be right. All right. Have a good one. Thanks for watching. Cheers.